In this fortnight's episode, Apple is in a fight for the privacy of all of us. What's in the news with stories on roads, recreational marijuana, artificial intelligence fighting the government, and other stories. And a herding cats segment on a recap of what I saw at Liberty Forum.
Welcome to The Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Find us at thelavaflow.com. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Thank you for joining me this week. Coming to you from the state that is the home of the Guinness World Record holder of the largest arcade in the world, this is the show that will bring you the people, places, and events that everyone in the Liberty Revolution needs to know. You can catch me on Twitter at the Lava Flow Pod. This is episode 31, An Apple a Day edition, and it's Tuesday, March 1st, 2015. When we've already had more than 170 people killed by police this year. What's wrestling my jimmies this week? You're about to find out. Let's do it to it. So, using a very obscure law written in 1789 called the All Writs Act, the U.S. government has ordered Apple to place a backdoor into its iOS software so the FBI can decrypt information on an iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino shooters. This order has set off a furious public battle between the Obama administration and one of the world's most valuable companies in a dispute with far-reaching legal implications. And not just legal implications, but moral ones as well. Apple began adding encryption to their phones in iOS version 8 back in September of 2014, and they should be applauded for that. As the company wrote on its website back then, quote, on devices running iOS 8, your personal data, such as photos, messages, including attachments, email, contacts, call history, iTunes content, notes, and reminders, is placed under the protection of your passcode. Unlike our competitors, Apple cannot bypass your passcode and therefore cannot access this data. So it's not technically feasible for us to respond to government warrants for the extraction of this data from devices in their possession running iOS 8. Now, Apple did this ostensibly to protect us all from themselves, which is to be lauded. While Android devices do have encryption as an option, it's not turned on by default like it is in iOS. A day after Apple's announcement of this technology in September of 2014, Google announced that it would also turn on their encryption by default on new Android devices. Although they did go back on that promise in March of 2015 due to, quote, performance issues. Now, this topic has caused a shitstorm in America that has few rivals recently. Everyone from congressmen and candidates for U.S. president, Google and Facebook, news media and think tanks, and the average Joe and Sally are picking their sides in this fight. Even the mother of one of the victims of this horrible crime said that she believed that Apple is well within their rights to refuse to create this backdoor. But let's be clear about one thing right off the bat. The only proper answer to this is for Apple to resist as strongly as possible, for several reasons. First, forcing Apple developers to do anything against their will is conscription. Plain and simple, and conscription is slavery. If they can force a man to use his knowledge and skills and labor to code this, then they can force us to do anything they want at any time that they want. This is very dangerous territory and would set a very dangerous precedent. As Tim Cook, president of Apple, said, quote, the engineers who built strong encryption into the iPhone to protect our users would, ironically, be ordered to weaken those exact same protections and make our users less safe. Not to mention that coding is a form of freedom of speech, and the U.S. Constitution supposedly protects speech as sacred. Isn't the government supposed to be the body that protects freedom of speech and all of our rights, not the body that is supposed to force us to use our speech as they see fit? I've used this quote several times on this show, and I'm going to continue to use it anytime the government ignores the document that is supposed to restrain them from this type of thing. Quote, But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or it has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. This was written by Lysander Spooner in his book, No Treason, The Constitution of No Authority. If you've never taken the couple of hours that it takes to read this pamphlet, then I highly encourage you to do so. Murray Rothbard considered No Treason to be, quote, the greatest case for anarchist political philosophy ever written. And that's saying an awful lot, because Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty is one of the many reasons that I'm an anarchist. No Treason is available in both audio format and PDF on the internet for free. I will have links to both in the show notes to this episode that you can get at thelavaflow.com/31. Another reason that Apple should fight this tooth and nail is that this is only the beginning. If Apple created this code that will unlock this phone and gives it to the government, then they will have the power to use this phone to open any iPhone at any time for any reason. Sure, in theory, they will need a warrant to do this, but we all know how little that stops the government, especially when getting a warrant is as easy as stealing candy from a baby in the government revolving door of warrant signing judges. And even if Apple is somehow able to create a program that will only unlock this single phone, which Apple says is not possible, then this will be used only as a test case, where the government will point back to this judge's orders over and over and over to get Apple to do this anytime that they want. And even more importantly, if the U.S. can conscript Apple to do this in a nation that outlawed slavery and supposedly supports freedom of speech, then so can any other country. Could you imagine if China or Russia had this technology? But even smaller than that, could you imagine if your local police department or sheriff had this capability? As Reason magazine pointed out, there is an even stronger reason to fight this order. Apple does not own this phone. As Reason said, quote, nobody in this dispute is arguing that the FBI lacks the authority to attempt to collect any property possessed by Farouk as part of the investigation on the San Bernardino terrorist attack. Nobody is even arguing that the FBI or the federal government doesn't have the authority to attempt to crack Farouk's phone on its own. There is, however, a mistaken comparison to the serving of a warrant to perform a search from those who would defend the FBI's order here. A search warrant is administered to the owner or resident of a property, but Farouk's phone is not Apple's property. This is not data held by a third party. This is not the same as serving a search warrant to demand access to someone's house. Rather, this is like serving an order to the company that manufactured the locks on the house's door and telling them that they have to come out and unlock those doors so the police can gain entrance. Now, while this phone is the property of San Bernardino County, since Farouk was given the phone as an employee of that county, San Bernardino is still within their rights to do whatever they need to do to get into this phone. But conscripting Apple to do so is immoral and illegal. And also, as Reason noted, do we really want to give this power to a government that has a history, and a recent history at that, of abusing surveillance authorizations? I know I don't. And this just isn't about this one iPhone. A lawyer for Apple said recently that federal law enforcement has requested that the company access information on 12 other iOS devices. And this list is likely not even a complete tally of the FBI's requests, and does not include similar requests from state or local police. The U.S. government is using the 1789 All Writs Act in all of these cases. As Apple said, this case is not just about one phone, it's about precedent. It's likely the government chose to take the San Bernardino case specifically public instead of one of the other pending cases because it can make a very strong argument for needing to get into a terrorist's iPhone. Apple is forced to take a position that obstructs a crucial seeming probe, in contrast to the other cases which did not involve terrorism charges. And the FBI seems to be winning the public relations battle in this situation, which is terribly sad. In an 1,100-word open letter that Apple CEO Tim Cook wrote to its customers, he said, quote, "The United States government has demanded that Apple take an unprecedented step which threatens the security of our customers. We oppose this order, which has implications far beyond the legal case in hand. Continuing with his letter, the implications of the government's demands are chilling. If the government can use the All Writs Act to make it easier to unlock your iPhone, it would have the power to reach into anyone's device to capture their data. The government could extend this breach of privacy and demand that Apple build surveillance software to intercept your messages, access your health records or financial data, track your location, or even access your phone's microphone or camera without your knowledge. While we believe the FBI's intentions are good, it would be wrong for the government to force us to build a backdoor into our products. And ultimately, we fear that this demand would undermine the very freedoms and liberty that our government is meant to protect. At issue is the fact that the iPhone in question, with the latest iOS encryption, cannot be brute forced, meaning the FBI cannot have a software program try all of the possible combinations to find the password to open the phone, because Apple instituted a configuration to wipe its encryption keys after too many wrong guesses, rendering its content permanently inaccessible. So the Bureau wants Apple to develop a customized version of their iOS operating system that permits an unlimited number of rapid guesses at the passcode, and sign it with the company's secret developer key so that it will be recognized by the device as a legitimate software update. The interesting thing about all of this is that San Bernardino County could have avoided every bit of it. They had already purchased but never installed a feature that would have allowed them to access this phone. The software is a simple mobile device management software that can be purchased by anyone for a few dollars per phone per month. I've worked for 2 different companies that had this technology on all of their phones. It gives the company or organization that owns the phone complete and total control, even allowing them to reset passwords and access data on the phone remotely. Had they installed this software, they would have had all of the data on the phone at any time. This is government incompetence at its best, and a waste of money since they purchased the software but never used it. Now, Apple is not an angel in this process at all. They have in the past worked with FBI to unlock many iOS devices that had previous iOS versions that were easier to crack. Apple even sent a team of engineers to San Bernardino County to take a crack at this phone as well, although those efforts ultimately failed. They also provided San Bernardino County the last backup data in iCloud for this phone, which was 6 weeks before the attack. Now, apparently an employee of San Bernardino County, at the direction of the FBI, reset the iCloud account password to this phone within 24 hours of the shooting. This meant that Apple could not access the more recent information that was backed up from the phone to iCloud. Granted, this phone does belong to the county, which means they own the data as well. Tim Cook said in his open letter, quote, "When the FBI has requested data that's in our possession, we have provided it. Apple complies with valid subpoenas and search warrants, as we have in the San Bernardino case. We have also made Apple engineers available to advise the FBI, and we've offered our best ideas on a number of investigative options at their disposal. We have great respect for the professionals of the FBI, and we believe their intentions are good. Up to this point, we have done everything that is both within our power and within the law to help them. But now the U.S. government has asked us for something that we simply do not have, and something we consider too dangerous to create. They have asked us to build a backdoor to the iPhone. Specifically, the FBI wants us to make a new version of the iPhone operating system, circumventing several important security features, and install it on an iPhone recovered during the investigation. In the wrong hands, this software, which does not exist today, would have the potential to unlock any iPhone in someone's physical possession. The FBI may use different words to describe this tool, but make no mistake. Building a version of iOS that bypasses security in this way would undeniably create a backdoor. And while the government may argue that its use would be limited to this case, there is no way to guarantee such control. But I, for one, am glad to see Apple fight back against this order to effectively give a master key to our rulers that it would allow them to access any iOS device at will. This makes me very proud to be a longtime Apple iPhone owner. Libertarian presidential candidate and self-proclaimed cybersecurity legend John McAfee wrote an op-ed offering to use his team of, quote, the best hackers on the planet to unlock this phone for the FBI. He claimed they would not create a backdoor, but they would primarily use social engineering and that they would have the data within 3 weeks. He said, quote, "I would eat my shoe on the Neil Cavuto show if we could not break the encryption on the San Bernardino phone. This is pure and simple fact. If you accept my offer, then you will not need to ask Apple to place a backdoor in its product, which will be the beginning of the end of America." McAfee ended the op-ed with a very boastful sentence saying, quote, "If you doubt my credentials, Google cybersecurity legend and see whose name is the only name that appears in the first 10 results out of more than 250,000. While I still don't fully know if McAfee is in fact a libertarian, I have to give him credit for this. He is offering to resolve this single issue voluntarily and without giving a massive backdoor to the government. Whether this is just typical McAfee looking for attention, or if he could actually do it, will likely never be known. But it sure would be interesting to see if the FBI took him up on this offer. Have you subscribed to the Lava Flow on iTunes or any mobile device yet? Then what's wrong with you? Go to thelavaflow.com/subscribe so you don't miss a minute of the show. And while you're subscribing, make sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review the show to help others find our podcast. thelavaflow.com/subscribe.
What's in the news? The news you need to know from a libertarian perspective.
In Without the Government, Who Will Throw the Homeless on the Street news, the city of Los Angeles has begun seizing tiny houses from homeless people in South LA. These homes were all built and donated by Elvis Summers. He built 7 of these homes, which came with solar-powered lighting, and placed them within encampments on overpasses along the 110 freeway for homeless people to use instead of tents. Some advocates for the homeless see the single-story structures, about the size of a garden shed, as a cheap and safer alternative to having the homeless sleep on the sidewalks. Neighbors and other opponents, however, say they provide cover for lawlessness and criminal activity. Quote, "These are only homes for prostitution, shooting up, smoking up," said June Ellen Richard, 54, who has lived all of her life within blocks of one of the freeway overpasses where the tiny houses were parked. June Ellen Richard sounds like a busybody to me. All the crimes that she described here are completely victimless, and none of them are any of her goddamned business. The issue here is that these are being placed on city property instead of private property, which does give the city the perceived right to do as they wish with these homes. Now, in my opinion, government shouldn't be able to own property, especially streets and sidewalks, but since the city has no solution for these homeless people, tearing down homes built with donations that keep some of the people off the street at night is just ludicrous. Quote, "It's not a permanent solution, but nobody is doing anything for shelter for these people right now," said Summers, who added that the houses should default to him rather than being destroyed by the city. Quote, "They just keep saying we need permanent housing, but it never happens." Summers should take some of his money and buy one of the empty lots in South LA to put the homes. But then I'm sure the government would still likely tear these down because they don't meet some obscure code that's impossible to meet. There is no pleasing the government. In Without the Government, Who Would Fix the Roads news, a Millbury, Massachusetts man decided to put on a demonstration for the city and repair a particularly pernicious pothole in his town. Thomas Perry, an experienced road repairman and New England outside sales manager for Paving Maintenance Supply Incorporated, said the job took him less than 10 minutes and cost him less than $30. Quote, "I didn't think it was a big deal," Mr. Perry said. Apparently it was. The city of Millbury has a road repair backlog of over $9 million and has no new tax revenue on the horizon to pay for it. So instead of praising this gentleman, what did they do? They went full statist when he posted before and after pictures of his work on the unofficial Millbury Facebook group. Quote, "He knows he's not supposed to do it," DPW Director Robert McNeil said. Mr. Perry himself acknowledged, quote, "You can't have citizens that are untrained doing it in the streets." That's what she said. But Mr. Perry was not untrained. He knew what he was doing as a former road repairman, and he works for a paving supply company where he got the material. Here we have a citizen showing the government how to do something more effectively and cheaper, and he is not given the credit he deserves. I can bet you that if people were paying directly for these roads to a company that had an incentive to keep the roads empty of potholes, he wouldn't need to be showing the city up. And that, my friends, was his biggest sin. He showed up the city and made them look like idiots. In artificial intelligence versus no intelligence news, a 19-year-old has made a free robot lawyer that has successfully appealed $3 million in parking tickets. Hiring a lawyer for a parking ticket appeal is not only a headache, but it can also cost more than the ticket itself. Depending on the case and the lawyer, an appeal, a legal process where you argue out of paying the fine, can cost between $400 to $900. But with the help of a robot made by British programmer Joshua Browder, 19 years old, it costs nothing. Browder's bot handles questions about parking ticket appeals in the UK. Since launching in late 2015, it has successfully appealed $3 million worth of tickets. Once you sign in, a chat screen pops up. To learn about your case, the bot asks questions like, were you the one driving? And was it hard to understand the parking signs? It then spits out an appeal letter, which you mail to the court. If the robot is completely confused, it tells you how to contact Browder directly. Since laws are publicly available, bots can automate some of the simple tasks that human lawyers have been doing for centuries. Beyond parking tickets, Browder's bot can also help with delayed or canceled flights and payment protection insurance claims. Although the bot can only help file claims on simple legal issues, it can't physically argue a case in front of a judge, for example. It can save users a lot of money. Quote, as a 19-year-old, I have coded the entirety of the robot on my own, and I think it does a reasonable job of replacing parking lawyers, he says. I know there are thousands of programmers with decades more experience than me working on similar issues. When driverless cars start dominating the roads of the future, they may also automatically appeal their own speeding tickets. Browder is already talking with entrepreneurs about integrating his bot into driverless cars. In no expectation of personal responsibility news, an Evansville, Indiana bartender is facing charges in connection with the drunk driving crash that paralyzed an Evansville doctor. Now, you might be asking, why is this a big deal? The big deal is that the bartender was not driving the car that hit the doctor. Her crime was providing a legal substance to a legal adult, Travis Cox. Cox was the driver of the car that hit the doctor, and he was 3 times over the legal limit at the time. And Indiana State Police are assigning blame to the bartender who served him the alcohol, Dawn Bunting. She was arrested for sale of alcoholic beverages to an intoxicated person. Give me a fucking break. If bars didn't sell alcohol to intoxicated people, they would go out of business pretty quickly. Now this goes right down to personal responsibility. Cox, who was sentenced to 12 months in prison, is being held responsible for his actions, which is a good thing. But to try to put responsibility for this action on anyone besides the driver, who moronically decided to get behind the wheel when he was heavily impaired, is just idiotic at best and evil at worst. This is no different than trying to sue gun manufacturers and gun stores for selling legal products to legal people who then use those items in an illegal manner. So what if she sold him alcohol after he was intoxicated? It was a voluntary transaction between 2 adults. She had no reason to know or to ask how he was getting home. It was none of her business. It's his responsibility to be responsible for himself. This is what happens in a nanny state. People have some expectation that someone else should always have some responsibility for their actions. This is backwards, and I look forward to a day when everyone must take responsibility for their own actions. Hopefully, I'll see that in my lifetime. In It's Happening news, the Vermont State Senate approved a bill to legalize recreational marijuana last week in a vote of 17 for and 12 against. The law would allow state residents 21 and older to purchase up to half an ounce of marijuana, which would be the new legal limit. State regulators could also begin to issue growing licenses in late 2017, and retail sales could begin in early 2018. The bill will now move to the State House of Representatives for approval. With this development, Vermont may soon join Alaska, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington as the only states who have stood up to the federal government and used nullification to legalize marijuana. This can only be good news for New Hampshire and the Free State Project, as once Vermont has passed this, there will be immense pressure on New Hampshire to do the same. Exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per episode donation of as little as $1 an episode, or use Bitcoin. Get exclusive content, rewards, and help the Lava Flow become fiscally neutral while providing you more content. thelavaflow.com/support.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
The weekend of February the 19th, I had the distinct pleasure of spending 2 days in the company of several hundred libertarians at the annual New Hampshire Liberty Forum, the yearly event put on by the Free State Project. Since this was my first Liberty Forum, I wasn't sure what to expect, but it delivered in spades. First of all, the group, Pork Family Connection, had an awesome daycare set up where we left our two boys during most of the sessions so that they could play with tons of other children and not be bored sitting in sessions that they cared nothing about. They had a blast in the playroom on both Friday and Saturday. Thanks to the Pork Family Connection folks for putting on a great time, including a pizza party on one day and a Build Your Own Sunday Bar event on another day. It was just awesome for those of us with little porcupines. Jess and I started off the first day with a session called Walk the Walk, How Being a Good Example is the Best Outreach, put on by our good friend Brett Bittner from the Advocates of Self-Government. Brett has been a guest on this show before, and you can hear me talk to him about walking the walk and the advocates on episode 15 of this show at thelavaflow.com/15. This is a discussion that you don't want to miss. We then took some time to go to the vendor area, where there were vendors selling anything from soaps to 3D printer creations and everything in between. Ian Freeman of Free Talk Live even had a booth set up with one of their Bitcoin ATMs, so I had my first opportunity to use one. It would not be my last chance that day. There were then several events on unschooling, the rights of sex workers, and others before we went to lunch. Now, each day there were 4 lunches that had speakers in attendance in different restaurants in downtown Manchester. There were lunches on Friday on school choice, medical marijuana, real estate, and entrepreneurship. We ended up going to the school choice lunch to hear about all of the school choice options in New Hampshire. This lunch was at Murphy's Tap Room, where there was yet another Bitcoin ATM. I could not resist buying some more Bitcoin while I had the chance. The afternoon brought several more talks than we could ever experience, including talks on liberty startups, a new view of the Great Depression, and effective citizen activism in court. I was able to spend a few minutes watching a live broadcast of the Flaming Freedoms podcast as well, which was a lot of fun. Walter Block gave a speech via Skype on living liberty, and there were several other talks as well. That early evening, I also had a chance to spend some time watching Free Talk Live do a live broadcast. It's really interesting watching the sausage being made. Then there was the big event of the evening, the State of the Free State Project, where FSP founder Jason Sorens, FSP President Carla Gericka, and FSP board member Matt Phillips spoke about the past and the future of the Free State Project. Carla Gericka dropped a big bombshell on everyone by saying that she would be stepping down as FSP president on March 1st because she had completed her personal mission of getting to the 20,000 signers. Matt Phillips, FSP board member and former roommate at Yale with FSP founder Jason Sorens, will be taking up the reins of leadership as the FSP works in its new mission of getting 20,000 actual movers to New Hampshire. That will be a tall order, as the FSP is currently only at 1,923 movers, less than 10% of the way. The good news is that the FSP is still taking signers. They are not counting down with signers anymore, but they are taking new signups to help them achieve the 20,000 movers, meaning it's not too late for you to go to fspsign.org right now and sign up to be a member of the Free State Project. The next day started with my wife, Jessica, sitting on a panel with 3 others to discuss applying the NAP to children. It was an excellent talk that was well received. Then the big event of the weekend was a standing room only event with Edward Snowden giving an interview. The interview was conducted by Nick Gillespie, editor-in-chief of Reason Magazine, and the half-hour interview ended up being about 50 minutes. Gillespie opened the interview describing the mission of the Free State Project, saying, Quote, they recently passed the 20,000 mark, so the Great Migration has started, and at some point I've been asked to welcome you to come to New Hampshire, to a free state when you have time. And I've been told that, among other things, it will be a free and independent New Hampshire. They're even getting rid of state liquor stores, and they're not going to have extradition with the rest of the United States, so hopefully you can join us. That brought thunderous applause and some laughs from Edward Snowden. Snowden weighed in on the Apple versus the U.S. government issue and gave his verbal support to Apple for its stand on the issue. When asked what his personal political philosophy was, Snowden said, quote, I do see sort of a clear distinction between people who have a larger faith in liberties and rights than they do in states and institutions. And this would be sort of the authoritarian/libertarian axis in the traditional sense. Authoritarianism is necessarily about the ordering and control of society. Now, they can argue that that will produce a better quality of life, but it cannot be argued that it would provide a freer life. And for me, I'm on the side of freedom. Snowden also answered critics who say that he's clearly an enemy to America. Why else would he be in Russia? His response to those critics were, quote, it's important to understand that I never intended to end up in Russia. Originally, I was hoping to get to Iceland. After that, Latin America when Iceland fell through. But the State Department canceled my passport, trapping me in Russia when I was initially on the move, as soon as they heard that I was in the air. Despite the fact that I've asked several times, they've refused to reinstate my passport, which is quite interesting. The United States, of course, criticizes me for being in Russia, but at the same time, they won't let me leave. Snowden ended his interview to a standing ovation of libertarians holding up Edward Snowden masks in front of their face. During the massive applause, Snowden said, thank you. I look forward to seeing you in New Hampshire. A perfect bookend to an incredible interview. I've linked to the full video of the Snowden interview on the show notes to this page at thelavaflow.com/31. I highly encourage you to watch it. You don't want to miss it. Now, it was then time for lunch, where we had 4 more luncheons to choose from. A Bitcoin luncheon, a Second Amendment luncheon, a New Hampshire Liberty Alliance luncheon, and a Civil Action luncheon. We went to the Bitcoin luncheon, where there wasn't really a speaker, but a lot of great conversation, and some Bitcoin switching hands. The afternoon brought a speech by Lynn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht. There were also talks on internet privacy, education freedom in K-12, community life in the Free State, buying real estate in New Hampshire, resources for new movers, and lots of others. My favorite of this afternoon was a Q&A with Free Stater and attorney Seth J. Hipple, where he spent an hour taking questions on any sort of legal question you could imagine. It was fantastic. That evening was the big awards banquet, the first annual Liberty in Action Awards dinner and ceremony. We missed that one because we didn't buy an advance ticket to the meal, but I heard there was an incredible song and dance number there, and there were many awards given to several worthy Free Staters for various categories. I ended up being a bit too busy to be there anyway, even if I had a ticket, because I was on a couple of segments of the Free Talk Live show to talk about this podcast, the current election season, and the Free Coast, the area of New Hampshire where Jess and I moved to. It was a great experience being on a show that I listened to every single day. All in all, Liberty Forum was an incredible experience, and one that I will likely repeat for many years to come. Jess and I already purchased our PorcFest tickets within an hour of those being released a couple of weeks ago, and we will have an RV there for the full week of June 19th through the 26th. If you missed Liberty Forum, you do not want to miss the Porcupine Freedom Festival. I hope to see you there. Thank you for listening to the show this week. As always, I need to thank my wife of 10 years, yes, 10 years, Jessica, for her help with the show. For the show notes to this episode, where I put links and other information that's been on this show, go to thelavaflow.com/31. This has been a bit of a dry week, with no new iTunes reviews and no new donors. I sure would appreciate if you could take a few minutes and go to thelavaflow.com/iTunes and give me a rating and a review. Apple uses these reviews to help drive more traffic to podcasts. So the more reviews that I get, the more people hear the message that I have to give. And last but certainly not least, if you want more of the Lava Flow and to keep this show ad-free, exercise your free market muscles by going to thelavaflow.com/support and giving a per episode donation of as little as $1 an episode using Federal Reserve notes through Patreon or Bitcoin through Coinbase. There are monthly costs associated with doing this show, and I need additional equipment to continue making this show better for you every single episode. I'm sitting pretty at 52% of the way towards bringing you more content every single week. Help me reach my first goal by going to thelavaflow.com/support. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.